So you're at the bottom of a
Yeah.
canyon, and you literally could be surrounded by the enemy shooting down like shooting fish in a barrel.
It wouldn't even be that hard. I mean, drop a handful of, grenades or what have you. And I mean, it would be incredibly easy to do a lot of damage. And so the canyon began to open up, became less narrow. And then, what I believe was either a mortar or an IED. There's people have different opinions, but basically an explosion started off what was an ambush, an explosion on the cliff. And then we began taking small arms fire. You could see muzzle flashes along the hillside, and there was other explosions behind us. And so at that point, and then the truck drivers, we were stuck. We couldn't maneuver around the truck because the canyon was so narrow, and the truck drivers left. They jumped out of the truck, and we were basically stuck. And so at that moment,
behind the truck.
Yeah. So at that moment, I was convinced that we wouldn't survive, because it was just too easy and too perfect a scenario to just completely obliterate us. How could we not? And so eventually, you have muzzle flashes that you can engage. And so we started firing back. Eventually at gunpoint, our squad leaders, got drivers back in the vehicle and got us moving. Fortunately, for whatever reason, I don't know if it was because they were terrible shots or they weren't very well motivated, but our vehicle never took what would be considered effective fire. There weren't rounds kicking up around us. So if they were trying to kill us, they were doing a lousy job, but they were shooting at us all the same. So there was just a period of sporadic fire as we engaged muzzle flashes and tried to suppress anyone who might have an RPG or suppress anybody who might want to take a shot and move our way through the canyon. And then as we came to kind of the end of the canyon and it opened up even more, there were more muzzle flashes coming from the right, and a silhouette of someone who was firing. Our squad leader on the vehicle shot and killed him, shot him 6 times and killed him, believing him to be the enemy. And then we keyed off of our squad leader's fire the slogan in Ranger Regiment. Maybe it's elsewhere, but for us, the slogan was, when all else fails, you go where your team leader goes, you do what your team leader does, and you shoot where your team leader shoots. And so having a senior, it doesn't relieve you of responsibility as someone manning a weapon system to identify your target. Just because a squad leader's firing there doesn't mean you blindly fire there. But it does mean that effectively, if Staff Sergeant in the Rangers is saying this is an enemy position and you have a powerful weapon system to engage that position, you better have some pretty strong evidence to the contrary to not fire there. And so,
quick question for you.
Yeah.
So you're being fired on from many, many different positions.
Yeah.
And then you see muzzle flashes, which you believe to be another enemy position.
Yeah.
How could you even identify whether that was friendly or foe?
You can. He was firing. So the individual that our squad leader killed was an Afghan military soldier who was fighting along with us, and he was firing over our heads at an enemy position on the other side that was behind me on the vehicle. So yeah,
it looked like they were shooting at you.
Yeah, and so it's very difficult. Again, the whole situation, the best way to deal with that situation is to not be in that situation in the first place.
Right.
Because there's not a lot of really good options. It's very clear in hindsight. There's no question that our squad leader misidentified that was a friendly. And adjacent to that Afghan soldier was Pat and another platoon mate named Brian. And so we fired in that position, and believing that to be an enemy position. And then that effectively concluded the ambush. And then we found out, we dismounted the vehicles. It was dark by that point, began to pull security. And then we knew that night that we had sustained 4 casualties, 2 dead and 2 wounded. Two that were wounded was our platoon leader, a lieutenant, and the radio operator. They were both wounded. And then the Afghan soldier was killed and Pat was killed. And so we knew that night. We didn't know until the following night that those casualties were as a result of friendly fire. And we learned that as kind of word was circulating amongst the platoon, that there were 50 cal rounds in the rock behind where Pat was killed. And well, there's only 150 cal in our platoon, and that was on our vehicle. And so that was the first inclination, the first indication that when you realize, because we had no idea where they were ahead of us. Pat Sturro was ahead of us in that canyon. They see the canyon explode behind them. And so what are they going to do? They're not just going to keep driving to their objective. They dismount from their vehicles and began to maneuver along the ridgeline to see if they can, engage the enemy as well, which is exactly what they should do. But having had no communication between the elements, there was no ability for the platoon sergeant or platoon leader to coordinate those efforts. And we didn't know what we didn't know in terms of where they were. So it was very much it was just a perfect storm of events that made that sort of outcome just tragically more likely. And
Right.
that's what happened.